Good morning, SeriesFest. Day one. Well, our first big day one. And I think I just watched a trailer featuring all of my favorite series and movies. So this is a really exciting panel for us and a partnership with the British Film Commission. We're so excited to have you here. I'm Claire Taylor. I'm the Director of Programming. And welcome to the Evolving Set Standards and Protocols and Case Study with the British Film Commission. Now you're maybe wondering what the genesis was with this conversation, and what really struck our eye with it as an organization is talking to the British Film Commission about the work that they're doing, evolving set practices. And that's not in the traditional sense, right? That's not always just about what we know has been happening on sets with props and with unions and things like that. This is really addressing things that have come up in the past 2 years when there's been a demand for mental health and safe sets for women and for men also, and for the LGBTQ community. So this was really something that was special for us to talk to the British Film Commission about and really hear what's been happening on their sets. So I'm really excited for this conversation, and to lead this conversation, I'm about to introduce our moderator, Ms. Keisha Hackett, from the staff editor at TV Line. Please join me.
And we have a panel of great creatives in the industry. I want to start with, I'm going to get this right, that's why I'm bringing on the paper. Louise Marie Smith is a sustainability consultant, and she's worked on films like Fast 9, Black Widow, and the upcoming Little Mermaid. Leo Anna Thomas has 20 years of experience in the art department on projects like The Crown, Black Mirror, His Dark Materials, and Small Acts, and now advocates for others as a well-being facilitator. And we have Elaine Hall, who is an access coordinator and on-set advocate, and she's led her own TED Talk. So props for that, and was the subject of HBO's Emmy Award-winning documentary Autism the Musical. Welcome everyone. Well, we're gonna.
You're right. My nemesis. Tall chairs.
Well, to start, let's. I want to throw it to you, Louise, because you're a sustainability consultant. So what does that entail?
Hi. Nice to see everybody today. Yeah, so my title is Sustainability Consultant. So I work with studios and streamers to essentially implement their sustainability policies on set, in practice, and in real time. And then aside from that, from the infrastructure side, I'm actually working with British Film Commission. That's kind of my connection to the BFC, and Film London, looking more at production infrastructure. So if we're asking productions to behave more sustainably, we have to provide the infrastructure for them to do so. So we're looking at stage spaces and how sustainable they are, where their power's coming from, how much power they have, so we can avoid generators. We're looking at implementing things like power cabinets at unit bases so that you don't need to bring diesel generators. So I'm trying to tackle it from every angle, so from the day-to-day on-set stuff, and then also the infrastructure that we exist with it.
Yes, because everything is connected, as we've learned in the past 2 years. And Leo, you're a well-being facilitator, so what does that entail?
Yeah, it's, hello everybody. It's a new role that was popped into my head about 10 years ago, and in the last 3 years we've been developing it. I'm a co-director of 6 Feet from the Spotlight, which is a non-profit organisation. It is basically a neutral third party that works with producers and goes into production to actually help build mental health policies, write stress mental health risk assessments, reading the scripts, looking for any triggering content, looking at schedules and seeing where crunch points might be, and basically being that neutral third party on the ground, on the floor, on the sets, to be able to listen confidentially to see if there's any issues with mental health or stress or anxiety. Long term, looking at working practices and the culture of our industry. We all work too many hours. The money is there that it doesn't need to be that way, so long term is to try and eventually change the working conditions and shorten those working hour days and build sustainable schedules and therefore sustainable humans. And yeah, we just basically collaborate with producers to help them look after their crew, look after their cast and retain them, their talent, keeping them in the industry. Active listening, talking interventions and any evidence-based tips that we can use in the moment to help de-escalate any anxiety or stresses, basically. Yeah.
That's a big job.
Yeah, it's been very busy, and it's finally taken off. It's only taken 10 years. But yeah, it's 10 years plus 100 years, I guess. It should have always been that way. But yeah.
And Elaine, you're an I can't talk. Accessibility coordinator. How did you get into that line of work?
Thank you. So I'm going to use a mic because of altitude. So my breath. Before I say what I do, I want to really applaud the people in the audience, because you're hearing where production needs to be and where we're going, and that you walked into this room says a lot about you as a thought leader. So applause for the audience. Okay, so I'm an access coordinator and also an on-set advocate. And I'll tell you how I got here and what I do, because it sure will define the position. I founded and run a non-for-profit called the Miracle Project, and I'm also co-founder of 1 in 4 Coalition, which is about authenticity and representation for individuals with disabilities and neurodivergent and deaf and low vision, invisible and visible disabilities. So how I got into this was I was invited, the show Atypical was casting authentically. And because of my non-for-profit organization, the Miracle Project, I had quite a number of teens and young adults on the autistic spectrum that had never even dreamed of being in production, but they had become actors through the theater and film program. And they were hired to be a peer group on the series of Atypical. I knew I couldn't just let them go there by themselves because they had never really been on a set before. So I volunteered my time to go with them the first week of production. And that week of volunteerism turned into my now career as an access coordinator. And I do everything from pre-production, post, to wrap parties in making certain that the production is accessible, and accessible in so many ways, with physical accessibility, communication accessibility, so much of what you're doing, we're doing it in terms of making things accessible and kind and sensitive to those who experience the world differently, which is actually 1 in 4. So that's what I do.
Yeah, that was a great descriptor, by the way. And on that note, because we're seeing the rise in shows that really portray people on the spectrum and put them in the front line and sort of highlight what their experiences have been. So what has it been like for you as an I cannot say this.
Just say access coordinator. Access coordinator. It's easier than accessibility.
Yeah.
We shortened it. Access coordinator.
There we go. Access coordinator. So what has it been like for you as an access coordinator? Do you find like your role is expanding, or like you're finding more others like you as well popping up in the industry?
Yeah, thank you. Fortunately, there is more authentic casting. And I've been very excited and proud to be on the forefront of that, because many of them are actors from the Miracle Project. But last year was one of my busiest years. I was sharing with Louise earlier that I was working on set for a new series, which you need to see. It's Amazon, As We See It, which stars 3 young adults on the spectrum portraying 3 characters on the spectrum. The crew, PAs, were on the spectrum. There was a whole diverse ability with on-set, in production, pre-production, post-production, so it was completely an inclusive set. And at the same time I was doing that, I was consulting with Shondaland on 2 different TV series, which actually had characters on the spectrum. And what is really intriguing to me is that on the set of As We See It, they were also casting neurodivergent actors to portray neurotypical roles. And that's what we want to see. We want to see not only authentic casting for an individual that actually has a disability or is neurodivergent or deaf or low vision. We want to see someone drinking a milkshake that just happens to have a disability. And that's part of my advocacy work. I also work as an on-set advocate, where on set, I'm there, so similar to what Leo was saying, in making sure it's a kind and nurturing environment. And it's possible. As we see it, we did a 10-hour day during the pandemic and got everything done. So it's possible.
Yeah. And speaking to that, Leo, because you spent 20 years in, on sets in the art department, what was that like, and what led you to becoming a wellness facilitator?
So 20 years in the art department. I gradually worked my way up, and I didn't want to be a production designer, and that was kind of where I was kind of being navigated towards. And I knew I didn't want to do that, and I didn't know where to be. So eventually, I like being on set, I like being with people, so I gradually fell into standby art director. I don't know if you have that role here. I think it's on-set dresser here. So I did that for the last 6 years, and kind of like a trigger warning now, some of the things I might be talking about suicide and mentioning things along those lines. I lost a friend, production designer Alan McDonald, to suicide. And I found out after his death that he had been bullied on the job. He was designing Mamma Mia 2, big film. He'd done big films. And I actually, take a step back a moment, I actually was bullied myself at the beginning of my career. And I became quite sick, physically, mentally, and I left the industry for about 4 years. People were telling me I shouldn't leave, you're never going to come back, all your contacts will leave, and I just basically ignored it and looked after myself. So when I came back in, come. That's okay. Come. Front row's good. So when I came back into the industry after 4 years gap, I decided that I would be honest about why I left, and decided to have the conversations about these things that are happening, people being bullied, working conditions, and I was shocked at how many other stories were coming my way, that it was happening everywhere. So I started having the conversation about there should be a department, there should be a person, there should be something in this industry that looks after people and making sure producers are legally meeting their duty of care and taking care of people. So gradually had this little idea that there should be this role, and that was 2013. And then I worked as a standby art director on more TV shows and more films. And then Alan passed away, and I was working on season 1 of his Dark Materials, and I was unbelievably stressed. And on the anniversary of Alan's passing, another friend and colleague in the industry, Morag Webster, who's a unit nurse, took her own life. And that was basically the catalyst of like, fuck it, excuse me, can I just swear? I was like, basically, this needs to change. So I basically did the hashtag mental health in film, which is on the back, and I started going on social media, starting having more conversations, and gradually built this role, became a mental health first aider, and became a director of the non-profit organisation 6 Feet from the Spotlight. I was put in touch with someone else who was doing a similar thing, who had also had a similar story. Luckily we got on together, and we just built the role, built the training. And now we worked with Amazon last year on a 25-week shoot in England. We're about to hopefully go on to Sex Education 4 on Netflix. And the BFI, the British Film Institute, have made it mandatory to have this role on all of their films. If you go for funding at the BFI, you have to have this role on your job. So it's working with producers to basically, I think we mentioned it earlier on about changing the infrastructure. It's not good enough just to place somebody who's a mental health first aider and doing their other job because it's already stressful. You've got to build and change the infrastructure from the top down and the bottom up. So we're kind of in there doing that and having these conversations. And yeah, it's all systems go. So it's like 21 productions this year we're covering.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and just and we write reports at the end so we can talk with producers about what worked, what didn't work, what they liked, what they didn't like, why they didn't like it, what can we do to change it. Then we go back and retrain our wellbeing facilitators about other aspects, about how to handle bullying, harassment, mediation. And it will keep evolving as it should do. It's never going to be a solid role in terms of that's it, training done. It's just going to keep expanding. I think I answered your question, I don't know.
No, you absolutely did, and thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah,
that was
no worries.
amazing. And, you know, thinking about evolving, do you find that your role is evolving too as we learn more and more amid this pandemic?
Oh yeah, completely. It's a totally different job. I actually have kind of a similar backstory as to how I got into this role myself. I trained in environmental science and worked as an environmental consultant for years for different industries after I graduated, but always had a fascination with film and television, but I didn't want to leave the kind of environmental sustainability work that I knew and loved behind. It was really important to me that I worked in that space and did something that was useful. But I really wanted to work in film and television, so I also was kind of like, this industry uses an enormous amount of materials, an enormous amount of fuel and power, and it's all so ephemeral. You build this huge town set, you shoot a week on it, and then it's in dumpsters. It's just, it's just baffling. And so I was like, I can see a spot here, and I would like to fill that spot. So I did kind of the same thing, just knocking on doors, mostly in Los Angeles with the big studios. This is kind of pre-streamers being really kind of a big player in the market as they are now. For a couple of years, just sort of saying, hi, I can see that there's something that needs to happen here, and I can see that the PGA have started to put some tools together, and they're starting to be like green runners on sets, but you know, you're putting people on these sets and they're entry level, so they have no authority to do anything, and you're asking them to kind of speak to people much higher up the chain than they are. And unfortunately, a film set is a hierarchy, whether it's right or wrong, it is. And so someone with very little authority was being asked as one person, and as we all kind of spoke about this morning, one person can't change an entire set. You need the buy-in of that entire crew. And so I could see that efforts were being made, but that it wasn't coming in as like a consultant level where there was any expertise there to be able to say, you know, I know something about this. I can kind of work this out for you in a bit more of a scientific way. So it's evolved so completely since then. Even the people who work as coordinators on my shows now, rather than having like PAs running around setting up recycling bins, and we're composting the food waste from catering now, and we have no plastic bottles, we have these big jugs all the time. We used to have so much of our focus be placed there because every single crew member sees the trash cans. They see the water bottles piling up on the edge of the set, and it's very ever present in people's mind. But in actual fact, about 48% of the carbon footprint of a tentpole production is just fuel use. That's where the big picture is, and we were so distracted for so long on recycling, and we can't recycle our way out of climate change. You know, so yeah, put a PA on there, set some recycling bins up. It's really not going to dampen your impact at all in the big picture way when we're talking about CO2 emissions. So the studios and streamers are now coming along, and this role has evolved, especially in the last 2 years, to be much more. And now I don't have PAs on, I'll have coordinators on, and they're looking at, you know, okay, what's our location list? When we go on these recce's, let's speak to the location owner. Do you have any house power? Can we access it? How many amps? Let's ask the gaffer how much of our lighting we can tie into the grid, which is, you know, hopefully they've got renewable electricity at that place. It's at least better than bringing a diesel generator. Let's spend our energy and our time working with electrical and working with locations and working with transportation to change the fleet and electrify it. Not putting bins out to recycle. You know, we need to be focused on these big picture items. And so, again, the training of those people that are working with me is becoming that much more technical, and we're trying to build kind of progression in this role, because again, retention is very difficult in these kind of, I would say, I don't know if you guys would agree that we're still seen as kind of slightly marginal, nice to have.
We're like, oh, compliance, we'll put you in there. You can do
It's
that.
like,
And
we can make a movie with or without you. And you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, but you shouldn't really. But you know, we're not holding a camera, so it's more about integrating and embedding it within every single decision that's made from day one. You should be thinking about the well-being of your crew. You should be thinking about the accessibility of your shoot, and you should be thinking about your impact on the planet around you, which again circles back to, you know, you think about like climate anxiety, then you go back to, you know, so it's
and it comes
all
in the
very
beginning, right? You've got to
interspersed.
get in the prep time. You have to come in and prep and embed it as soon as possible. Sometimes I get 3 hours prep. Sometimes I get 3 weeks prep, and give out well-being plans to crew and cast, and that sets it straight away. You get that working, you trust relationship with everyone at the beginning, rather than just being put on set when it's too late.
Yeah, I used to get 2 weeks prep, and now I usually start, because I'm across a lot more productions and then have a team working kind of at levels below me. I start, and the first week the line producer starts, I have a meeting and onboard them and say, okay, welcome to the show, like here's how we would like to do it, do you have any ideas? And have them introduce me to their heads of department the week they start. Not me going, hey, sustainability here, can you spare 5 minutes? The line producer needs to say, we have a sustainability manager on this show, and I need you to make 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And as you plan, I want you to think about this and build it into the way that you plan this show. So we're getting there.
That's something that sorry, I'm not going on.
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead.
That's something that we're struggling with placing wellbeing facilitators, is we always try and speak to the first AD and be like, can we have 60 seconds? I never say a minute, because 60 seconds sounds short. It's like, can we just have 60 seconds to do like a gather together, what we're all here for, take a breath, and it actually makes a difference. We're like, this is what we're here for, we're going to be kind to each other, we're going to work forward, and that is proving difficult just to get the 60 seconds. So it's changing those conditions and those behaviours and the kind of rushing around. It's like, take a minute, and it will affect everything else.
Yeah.
And those cups and recycling bins and stuff, half the time I just moved them off set when I was like, they're always placed on set, the cups and stuff. So.
No, it's so similar. I now have it that I'm in the meeting with department heads, all department heads, pre-production, and sometimes we'll do it on Zoom. So we have, it's an hour. Whatever they're going to give me, I ask. So an hour, 2 hours, and then also to be able to lead the safety meeting. So right from the start, when we have a safety meeting, I always get an opportunity to talk and ground people, breathe. Even if I'm on just for a day player, allowing that time to be aware. And I'm neurodivergent myself, so I do really what I need in order to be able to be my best in an environment. So, and they start telling me, they say, boy, we should be running our set like this every day. Why are we being kind and flexible and accessible only when you're here, Elaine? And so that's the goal. And as Louise and Leo have said, it starts from the top. It starts from the top, being open and willing, and everybody, again, who is in this room, to have that sense of purpose and that we can do things differently, and that it's successful. So.
Yeah. And it's interesting because over the last 2 years, I think it's weird that it took a pandemic for us to really think about these things. How can we be better in our, not just our work lives, but our daily lives as well? And the idea of setting boundaries for yourself, both at work and at home. So for all 3 panelists, how have you struggled with setting a boundary for yourself? Yeah. I know, it's a deep one, right?
I don't mind going first on, actually, because it's when I was a standby art director, the last job I did was with Steve McQueen, Small Axe, and it was incredibly hard. Steve McQueen coming from like huge budgets and a lot of time and making big films, to then making a TV show, but he would call them TV films, shoot them in 3 weeks. It's like a feature film in like 3 weeks, and it was incredibly stressful. And I was warned away from that job by about 6 people because it just, all the catalysts and red flags were there about how difficult the conditions could be. So in terms of boundaries, that was one of the first jobs where I went in with like the 3 strikes and you're out rule, where if I got shouted at again like I was years ago, I would take a moment to kind of neutralise myself, ground myself, go back to that person and explain that it was wrong and have a one-to-one and try and basically have an apology. And then if it happens again, make a formal complaint to production immediately. And if it happens a 3rd time, I would literally take off my walkie-talkie and down and just leave the job. And I told the production designer that and said, this is what I'm coming in for, just to let you know. And they were completely on board. It's like this. So as soon as I had those boundaries, I felt so much more confident and empowered to know that I know what I won't take, and I know I'm good at my job, and I know that I'll get pushed. And some stress is good. You know, stress isn't bad when it becomes pressure. It's so as soon as I had that, I felt so confident going in.
Yeah.
And then we try and train our wellbeing facilitators to like have those boundaries to look after themselves, to make sure that their own resilience is strong, because as soon as they walk on set, the role is utilised immediately, which is great, but you have to make sure your own resilience is strong to actually be grounded enough to look after yourself and continue the role.
Yeah, I think that so much of it, first of all, we're in a culture today that really should not allow, I mean, things we call bullying used to be just typical set behavior. People yelled and screamed and you know, but now things have been set in place. There are protocols, there is HR, so we do have that. And yet, even with that, individuals were so worried about their jobs that they were allowing themselves to take that. So I think those knowing and getting really clear, as Leo was saying, as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable behavior from anybody. And then the other thing, people often say we have to stand up for ourselves. And I always look at it differently in that, no, we have to stand in ourselves. So we all can feel it in our bodies when something doesn't feel right. And feeling it in our bodies manifests into illness. And because we have been around for the past 2.5 years, much more aware of our mortality and what's important and what's essential, things like people yelling at us are not essential. And that we've been able to prove there is a different way of being and knowing what's important. I mean, I've been really fortunate to have very open and willing sets that I've been working on. And I know the show that I was just on, As We See It, people were saying this is the kindest set we've ever worked on, and they were able to reveal that they themselves are neurodivergent, or their child is, or that they have a disability, because it was never talked about, and that having that kind of safety and willingness to be sensitive. I mean, we're artists. Why do we get into this business in the first place? Because we're sensitive, and then we're supposed to knock all that out of us in order to be productive. And you don't have to. So creating those internal sense of what's right and what's wrong, and those external boundaries, and getting that support.
A word, yeah. Yeah, Louise, how have you dealt with?
So we were actually just talking about boundaries right before we walked in. So and actually we were talking about it in the car on the way over here this morning. So I think mine is in terms of, because I'm based in the UK, most of the kind of top 2 that I work for, like, so my direct kind of bosses, if you like, are based in Los Angeles. So I have a time difference of 8 hours. So I find it very difficult when they put a meeting in at 8:30 p.m., which is only lunchtime to them, but I should be now having dinner and relaxing and taking just those few hours for myself before it all starts again the next day. And I find it really difficult to say no to that, because I'm a people pleaser and I want to make people happy, but also that time difference really just put that into kind of like stark relief in a way. So I've started to do it again. It puts me in a place of slight discomfort still, but I'm working on it, because I know it's a reasonable request. And I noticed that I'm starting to get emails now with the signature at the bottom, my working and waking hours may be different to yours, please do not feel the need to respond immediately. Which I think is something we should all be doing, and just reminding people, because you get an email in and you think immediately, I must deal with that, this person's waiting for me, and just because they sent the request out, it's not on you to drop everything else you're doing and immediately respond to that. pull yourself out of focus that you might have on something else. So I think that was one that I was kind of thinking, yeah, I need to start saying this when those meetings go in my calendar in the middle of the, in the middle of the evening, which shouldn't be working hours anymore.
It's important, yeah.
So I think that's one for me.
And one of the things, it's important to remember perspective, because oftentimes, especially in a creative industry, you're like, this is the most important thing in the world, and we have to sacrifice everything to get it done, and put all this energy, and you're sort of grinding yourself away, and you have to remember, this is not brain surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Some things can wait.
Yeah.
I don't have to, give all of myself to this industry. I can still set those boundaries and take care of me while still getting the job done.
Yeah, because it's a hamster wheel, isn't it? You're like, well, we'll get to the end of this shoot, and the top creatives will, and they'll have that downward bit where they're in post. But if you're on-set crew, you go from one to another, and there isn't a break.
It's quite addictive. It's quite an addictive, adrenaline-fueled, exciting, extravagant, boring, wonderful, calming, stressful environment. And we're all creatives when you do it, and we're there for, you're passionate, perfectionist, you want to put everything in it. So kind of learning to understand that in yourself, to be like, I can still do a great job and not be here all the hours. But that takes, behaviour change takes years to shift and understand that.
And then also being the on-set advocate, and also in the work that you're doing, Leo, is being the voice for those that are not able to speak up for themselves. And so that's a lot of the work that we do is, especially when I work with people with disabilities or neurodivergent or deaf or low vision, that to be able to see from their perspective and be that one person on set that they could completely be anxious or concerned about certain things that are happening on set, so that they don't have to speak up, that I can speak up for them. And that's, we as the on-set advocates are able to be a voice and express what needs to be expressed. And then the willingness for the crew to adapt. I mean, there was one, when I was working on As We See It, we had one AD was talking very, very fast. And one of my actors was slow in processing. And so it was coming out like the peanut. Well, because I'm also very sound sensitive myself and my own neurodivergency, it was coming out like that to me, but I've trained my brain to be more focused so I can hear it, but I can also hear what they were hearing. So to just be saying, hey, can you say that slower? And they do. Or if they don't, then I say, please give us a minute so that I can be an interpreter and then reflect back to that person what was said. So just being able to take that moment, not only for myself, but for those that are that we advocate for.
We do similar things when we train our wellbeing facilitators. We've trained 10 in Wales to cover Welsh productions, and I think 12 in England to cover, and so it's like, there's a good amount growing. But we kind of go on board and help. It's similar to what you said in terms of not so much bridging the gap between producers. There's always a kind of us and them, and there's always like a crew and the producers, and that what they call. I don't know if it's the expression here, but the grown-ups. I don't know if that's the expression here.
Or the suits.
And it's but they just call them producers. They're not grown-ups, because immediately you put yourself in a child position, and immediately you've already been like, you can't speak up. You're not allowed to speak up. So we kind of help empower people to have a conversation. On the Amazon job last year, it was 25 weeks long. And there was up to 800 crew. It was a huge, huge job. And we realised there needs to be more than one wellbeing facilitator. We learned. It was just me doing that. I was busy. But we kind of took moments with crew members to help, like if they were worried about talking to their HOD for a reasonable adjustment, or worried about talking to a line producer or a production manager, we'd offer to sit with them. I'd offer to sit and be like, what are you nervous about? What is it you want to say? Write it down. Pretend I'm that person and kind of coach them, and then say, right, I'm not going to go in and do it for you because this is a new role and it's not on every production, but also you want to help people do that for themselves so they can take that with them and show them with their colleagues. So but basically we offer up to talk to you at the beginning, go and have that meeting, and then I can speak to you afterwards, and then you can see what worked, what didn't work, and then just kind of keep training them to do that. And some of that happened on Zoom, some of that happened in person. And we were successful about having some reasonable adjustments made, especially in the costume department was huge. some people were travelling 2.5 hours commute each way, and it was like, you need to stay in a hotel one night a week, get at least one night decent sleep or two, and then have meetings with HODs who actually were really understanding. It was like, oh right, we didn't know that, then let's stagger our start times, like do a shift, you can start later, you can leave earlier. It's just communication with people, and it's easily done, but it's such a fear-based industry that we get stuck in our heads and we feel like we can't. So we try and help similarly to be that advocate and be like, you can break that down, and you can make that work and still do a good job, and you will get hired again. It's kind of just, it's going to take years.
Yeah,
It's going to take years.
I'm impressed that that this has become a position, an actual position. I mean, that's what we're working towards in the U.S., to have an access coordinator and or an on-set advocate on every production, so that you don't even know who is hiding their disability. One of the founders of 1 in 4 is a top manager, and they were not able to attend their clients' festivals and awards because there was no accessibility. She's disabled. She's physically disabled. And so she couldn't walk the red carpet because there was no accessibility. She couldn't go up the stairs because there was no ramp. And what we find is what's good for individuals with disabilities is actually good for everybody. There's money being saved when you build a ramp. There's money being saved for the sound equipment to be able to go up and down faster. The gaffer, I mean, everybody benefits. And what's being sensitive, like, you know, I try to, the bell on set is very startling to individuals on the spectrum, myself included. And but we find that it's startling for everybody. So what's good to be more accessible is really good for all of us, and production increases, and like what you're saying with communication, then we're able to create not this top-down, you know, kind of way of doing production, but we're all doing it together. And I have to say, Jason Kadams, who I worked with on As We See It, he runs his sets that way. Everybody's voice matters. So having and you know, he's had a phenomenal career, so it's doable, and I wish it was mandatory like what you guys are doing.
It's slowly becoming mandatory. Is like, I mean, it's part of the law, which isn't happening yet. but I use the word, but maybe best practice is the best word to use.
I like
but
that.
I like using mandatory. But it's gradually getting there. And the same with call sheets and schedules. I'm dyslexic, and being in the art department, that was fun, because it was dyslexic with numbers, like in measurements. I got very stressed. But looking at call sheets, I'm like, what am I looking at? And looking at schedules and like the end of the day and the date at the bottom and not the top, and I'm just like,
why did they do that?
I know, I'm just like looking at it like there's too much. Plus, it's just white paper, black writing, and it's like the words move all around for me, and I can't. When I used to break down scripts, it would take me hours. I'd work for free for like a week or two because I needed that time. I couldn't do my job otherwise. So we're talking with a production company called Brazen Productions, I think, and they have like color coded in certain ways. Even if they're a green production and not printing out paper, they would give out sides that were actually coloured on the screen and different font colours to help people. And that's something that we can find out with our wellbeing plans we give out at the beginning. It's a completely optional but confidential plan that we give out to crew and cast. A number of cast fill it in. Production never see it, and it's an opportunity for someone to say, I'm neurodivergent, or I'm dyslexic, or I'm LGBT, I'm queer, and there's not many people that look like me on set. So it's having that breakdown at the very beginning and having that building at the set at the beginning.
That's great.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing how openly we can speak about these things now?
Yeah.
Because you can think back 10 years ago, were people openly talking about seeing a therapist? You know, like these things are changing. So how do you feel about this kind of shift in the industry that's happening right now?
I think it's marvellous.
Yeah, it's
I
great.
think it's marvellous. I think it's having, my pronouns are they, them, and I don't correct people when they say she, her. I'm still working on it, but that's a language that's new, and it's a language that is finally clicked, but it's been around for years, but we now have a language, and we now know how to communicate that. So these issues have always been there. It's just now we're more open to talk about it, and unfortunately it takes something horrendous like a suicide or a pandemic for us to finally open our eyes. I think that's with everything in life. It's always something huge that has to happen for adjustment. But the main thing that we're keeping an eye on at 6 feet from the spotlight is to make sure we're not just having a box ticking exercise, and that we're not just compliant in terms of like, there you go, we're not going to talk to you, just go on set and do some meditation or something. No, that's not what it is. So we're trying to really make sure that we don't fall into that trap, because suddenly that could be the new norm, where it's just, oh, you're there but you're not really doing much.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to avoid as well, which could easily tip that way.
I think there's so much good stuff happening with DEI, and we're saying DEI, add the A, by more authentic casting, by, I think, bringing therapy up and having it as part of story. And so there's stories now that have a more personal, so that what is very important to me is that people can start seeing themselves on screen, and not that they have to look and be perfect, that everyone has flaws, everyone has differences, and that it's about those differences that actually binds us together. So I'm excited about where we're going and what we're doing. I love that children are able to see somebody. I mean, let's hear it for Coda, right? That they're able to see, right? I mean, there's challenges, but they're able to see themselves on screen. Atypical, this new show, as we see it, it's changing people's lives. It's opening up the conversation so that we don't feel so alone. And if media changes lives, changes culture, and to be the first to be out there telling these stories, showing these stories, and then creating these types of sets, it may take 10, 20 years to,
We'll all be retired by then. Just watch the fact that all that work's been done.
We'll just go high five. And you were here.
It's your job to move forward with it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Louise, because we're also openly talking about sustainability and climate change and all these things, so how's it been like for you watching that flow throughout the industry as well?
Yeah, and in the same way, to build that into editorial, so, in the media industry we have a carbon footprint that is pretty huge, let's be honest, but our mind print we always talk about is much, much bigger. So I can help and look at what are the 300 crew on this show doing day to day, and what can we do practically on our set behind the scenes, but I also need to think about what are we putting out there in terms of, we have historically, our heroes have been in private jets and giant houses. They've been enormous consumers of all the things that are terrible for the climate, and that's who we idolize. So can we have sustainably aspirational behavior on screen?
I like that.
Does our hero drive an electric car? Are they vegan?
Yeah.
Is their kid in the scene at home asking them about something they've learned at school? I think Big Little Lies had that. I don't know if anybody saw it. One of the characters, I mean, they're a pretty bad example because they all live in giant houses and drive huge cars, but one of the characters' children was learning about climate change at school, and they come home and find them hiding in the closet because they're so overwhelmed by climate anxiety, and they've had their eyes open to it, and just things like that. Or Madam Secretary did it well. I think the daughter in that was vegetarian and would talk about like the climate impacts of diet, and also it was a good show to do it because she works in policy, she would be dealing with that. So I think it's about fitting it in where it fits in, right? If it takes you out of the scene and the story, and it's obviously a big clanger like some product placement can be, that's not what we're talking about. We're like, how do we weave this in as it's being woven into our daily lives? You will always see more people walking around with reusable water bottles now, or coffee cups. So if you've got a walking tour with two characters and they're drinking coffee, they don't need to have the disposable one. They can have, that didn't change your script, it didn't change your action, didn't cost you any money. Just have props, buy that one instead of that one.
Yeah.
And it's done, right? You've subliminally put it in.
Subtly.
If the character's driving home from work and parking up, do they just plug their car in before they walk into the house, as opposed to just having like a giant gas guzzler? So there's so many ways we can do it, both kind of scripted, but also just very, very subtly, and have that mind print on our audience that this is what we should be aspiring to. And this is what we should be conscious of and caring about. And those are our heroes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I was thinking like every film school should have a sustainability, a mental health person, accessibility, as part of the training for every up-and-coming TV and filmmaker.
This is what we're talking about going into. We've done a few presentations at London Film School and a couple of film universities, because they're the new producers and the new directors and the new creatives coming in who already have that awareness. So that whole system is going to tip, and it's like what we spoke about in the car earlier on. It's literally like it's gone from 0 to 100, and we're kind of recalibrating it. And it's I was going to say something else. It's completely gone out of my mind. So I'll come back in.
But I do want to close things out with looking towards the future, because we are seeing that progress, but what would you like to see even more moving forward, and what are you looking forward to seeing? I know that's a thinker.
So from the sustainability perspective, I think we're finally on the right path, and it feels like there's some movement. It felt like forever to get here, but I'm grateful that we are. I think, as you mentioned, the young up-and-coming crew that we have, they're very aware and they care about it a lot. So BEC2, which is the union in the UK, just did a survey, and they included, kind of what things are really, really important to you. And I think mental health and wellbeing came out the top thing that people on every, across the board in crews are concerned about, and climate change was the second one. So our crews are already thinking about this. They want this. They're dying for this to happen. They're crying out for it. And there's a real open ears to that amongst our crews. And speaking of kind of working with film schools, I know that Albert, who's the body that kind of deal with sustainability in the UK, are working with film schools now, so that you have a module on sustainability. But also, not that you can, what they're doing at the moment is you select to do it if you want to. What they're talking about where we need to be is it's in every class. So if you're taking camera, it's integrated. It's not this on the side thing that some students who have that kind of mindset, and you're preaching to the converted slightly, will go and take that class. It should be in every class, as should,
it shouldn't be optional,
and
it should be mandatory.
Every class you take, you can't opt out of considering these things when you're training.
I think we pitched an idea to Twickenham Film Studios, which is like family to me. I'm from Twickenham, and the studio is really, really small.
Yeah, so cute.
But it's beautiful. Yeah, we live in the same
we
town.
We realised when we got to Denver that we lived walking distance.
We got to Denver, like, we live in the same town. We pitched an idea to them recently about being the first studio in the UK to have an in-house wellbeing facilitator. So basically, you're changing the infrastructure, so every production that uses your studio has access to this. And we're currently working with Charlotte Riley, who's wonderful and responsible for Wonderworks, who has like a creche and like parent looking after children in Leavesden Studios. It's a whole thing set in, so you can come to work with your child and they go into creche for the whole day. We're hopefully trying to hopefully, did I just say? Yeah. We're hopefully going to try and figure out how we can collaborate together to make it an infrastructural change, that you are building. These studios are popping up everywhere in England. They're being built. I think Netflix are building in one in Newport, Wales, and the Time and Space Co. folks who are revamping Twickenham are building a studio in Liverpool and Kent. And we basically pitch to them, say, have this room, have this department built into your actual building, so it's there. And that's what I hope will shift, and that might take a few years, but if you have that solid from the get-go, productions can't avoid it. And you can house intimacy coordinators in there, wellbeing facilitators, you can have creche care and everything, and it's just changing that entire language of this industry.
What I want to see is just as far as we've come with BIPOC, LGBTQ, seeing people of different, colors and shapes and sizes on screen. I mean, look at Bridgerton, of course. That we do the same with disability and neurodivergency. That we see in every production just some, a little person, someone who uses a wheelchair, someone with Down syndrome, that it's just part of the fabric, because that's how real life is. and as well as the crew, that we realize that there are billions of dollars that can be made from people seeing themselves on screen, that there is tremendous talent, that there's a door that they can't get through because they may have a disability. And so the industry is missing out on different perspectives and talent in all aspects. I mean, one of the top FX designers uses a wheelchair. And so to be able to just increase that fabric just as well as we've done in, with all the other areas. So it's DEIA, access. And what that does on an internal level is it takes away shame, because people have shame of being different or looking different. And if you remove that shame and instead say, oh, okay, the possibilities, and there's someone like me on screen, then the fabric of our culture just deepens and widens, and we make systemic change in all aspects where people are going to want to be sustainable and want to feel healthy emotionally. And I just can't wait to turn on the TV and to see shows like that.
Yes. Thank you so much to all of our panelists today. Thank you all for joining us, and to the British Film Commission for partnering on this panel. Amazing job. Thank you. Good talk, everybody.
It's Mitch with shorter hair. How's it going? Good, how are you? I heard the students Oh my gosh. How have you been? Good, busy. And I hear Britta's working with you guys now. And, yeah, Willabong started.